Welcome everybody. Sorry for that delay. We've just been, we've got a lot of people on the call today, so we're just running a little behind schedule. Apologies. So hi everybody, my name's Tamara Kennery. I'm the President of the Mosman Chamber of Commerce, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us here today. We've got some special guests on, and of course our fabulous local business community. Just quickly, a bit of housekeeping. This meeting is being recorded and will be available later on the Mosman Chamber website. We've received quite a few questions in advance, so I'll be running through those in a moment. And if anyone else has any questions during the meeting, then please feel free to ask them via the chat. And I'd just like to ask everybody, if you wouldn't mind just staying on mute. We've got so many people on the call today, it's really going to be the quickest, most efficient way for us to get through everybody's questions. So I'm not sure if the Minister has been able to join us yet, but we've got a few official guests to welcome here today. We're very fortunate to have representatives from all levels of government, local, state and federal. On our panel today, we're going to have the New South Wales Minister for Finance and Small Business, the Honourable Damien Tudehope. We've also got the Small Business Commissioner, Chris Lamont. And our special guest, the Member for North Shore, Felicity Wilson. Hi, Felicity. Member for Warringah, Zali Steggall. The Mayor of North Sydney, Councillor Gilly Gibson. And the Mayor of Mosman, Councillor Carolyn Corrigan. The General Manager of Mosman Council, Dominic Johnson. Oh yeah, I see the Minister's here. Thank you very much for all joining us. And assisting me today, I've got Nicole Robertson from the Neutral Bay Chamber of Commerce, and Nicole's going to be monitoring the chat for any additional questions that come through. Now I'm just going to quickly hand over to Felicity Wilson.
Thanks so much, Tamara. Thanks everybody for joining in, and thanks for getting this off the ground in a quick lightning pace. I'd like to echo Tamara in welcoming you all and thank you for joining us. We do have a couple of guests here today, but they're really here for you. So we want to hear your views, your questions, your concerns. I mean, you would have been listening intently to the Premier, as we all do, and as she said, we're here to support you. We've got a multi-billion-dollar economic support package, but there are always going to be people who remain concerned or uncertain about how to access that package, or may feel like they don't meet the criteria or don't know how to meet the criteria. Or there might be certain industries that have different reflections or concerns or ideas or issues they want to pass on to us. So we really want to hear from you, and we want to make sure that we turn around the grants and applications that we have available as quickly as possible as well. So pass on the feedback to us, but also share your questions and concerns. And my colleague here, Damien Tudehope, you can see him there. He's listed as iPad 2. He's the Minister for Finance, and he's the Minister for Small Business. So thanks for joining us, Damien. And we've also got the Small Business Commissioner, Chris Lamont. I can't see him on my screen at the moment, but I think it says Chris Lamont on his screen. So thank you for joining us. We'll get them to say a couple of quick words, but this is mostly about you as our local businesses. So looking forward to hearing your feedback. And thanks so much, Tamara, for organising this, and Nicole for your work in helping.
Thanks, Felicity. So we would like the Minister, would you like, yep, you're on mute, thank you.
Good day, thanks Tamara, thanks Nicole. And thanks everybody for taking the time out. I know this is really a difficult period of time for small business. The level of inquiry that the Small Business Commissioner has, that the Business Concierge Service has at Service New South Wales has been stratospheric in terms of the businesses which are under stress and which are needing support at this time. So I can't imagine in many respects what businesses are going through, and I often say from my own experience in business is that if you go to bed at night and all of a sudden I told you your customers can't come through the door, and you still have obligations to pay rent, you've got to pay your bank back, you've got to pay your suppliers. That's the definition of stress through the roof, because generally that's what business relies on, to be able to make sure that it goes from day to day. And when governments issue orders which are realistic for the purposes of dealing with this health pandemic, then it has the flow-on effect of being this major significant impact on businesses. There are lots of things that we have done, and I want to just start by saying that the first and foremost thing that I encourage all businesses to do is to get advice in respect of where they should go, what business grants are available, whether it's from the state government, whether it's in the Commonwealth government, what the eligibility criteria are in respect of meeting those grants, what additional things may be available to you, help with negotiating with your landlord. Potentially there are opportunities for deferral of loan repayments with the banks, and the banks have been very obliging in relation to them coming to the party for the purposes of helping businesses survive. Whether it's opportunities to potentially get land tax relief, whether it's opportunities to use Dine and Discover in a different way, all of which are potentially opportunities which are available to businesses at the moment. In broad terms, the grants can be split up in that are available at the moment for small businesses can be split up into a number of categories. The first and foremost category is those grants which are available directly to the business. In the last 3 weeks, those grants have comprised business support grants, and they are available to businesses who have an annual turnover of between $75,000 and $10 million. And if you can demonstrate by declaration a downturn in your business of 30%, then you are entitled to a $7,500 grant. If it's 50%, it's a $10,500 grant, and if it's 75%, then it is a $15,000 grant. And there are different requirements in respect of each of those grants. But by and large, we have tried as much as possible to make the application process as simple as possible. So that's the level of grant which has been available up until today. The next level opportunity for grants are what we call the micro grants, which are available for those businesses that have an annual turnover between $30,000 and $75,000. And they're, again, grants which where businesses have suffered a more than 30% decline, they can apply for a $1,500 per week grant. Going forward, after the first 3 weeks, we move into a different category of grants. And they, in fact, commenced yesterday, which is called Job Saver grants. And they're grants for businesses, again, with a turnover of up to $10 million. And you can get a grant of up to $10,000 per fortnight for the purposes. Now, you'll have to excuse me if sometimes I get confuse these figures, but I think I'm pretty right. $10,000 per fortnight, with a view it being 40% of your weekly payroll. So if your payroll per week was $100,000, your weekly payroll, your 40% of that would be $40,000, and you would qualify for a $10,000 per fortnight grant in respect of the Job Saver program. Now, that's a grant amount which is available going forward from this period, anticipating that the lockdown will finish at a period of time. But as I'm talking, lots of people are probably thinking, you've just identified business support grants, Job Saver grants, micro grants, all of which have different eligibility criteria. And it reinforces the point that I make about the importance of getting assistance with the eligibility criteria through professional advice, if at all possible, and making sure that the application forms are completed in such a way as to maximise your opportunity for getting the best possible grant, which might be available to affect your circumstances. Now, there are a myriad of other things that we do in relation, or which are available. There's lease support, which is available through the Small Business Commission, and I'm sure he will, commercial lease support, which is available through the Small Business Commission, and he'll speak to that shortly. There's potential payroll tax waiver and deferrals. There is a business concierge service, which is available to give free advice in respect of potential availability for those people who can't afford professional advice to help them complete the eligibility forms. So I'd like to, the problem that we face, and I'm sure Chris will bear this out, is that every business has its own specific issues which it can identify from time to time, which may affect the ability to get support. Now, what I think is really important from these forums is to make sure that we hear what the businesses are, in fact, or the impact on businesses, which are able to be addressed, or potentially are cracks where businesses are falling through, which we aren't looking after properly. Now, from time to time, we meet with COSBA on a regular basis and they identify problems, but when you actually drill down to the individual chambers of commerce, then you can hear potentially some of the individual difficulties which those businesses are suffering from time to time. I just want to finish by identifying one further category, and that is where individuals have lost wages. So we've lost wages or income. I've identified the programs which are available for the business, but an individual who suffered a reduction in their working hours by over 20 hours per week are entitled to Commonwealth Government COVID assistance, and that COVID assistance is available through Service Australia, whereas the business grants are available through Service New South Wales. If the individual has suffered less than 20 hours reduction in employment hours, they can still apply through Services Australia for an individual grant. So if you've suffered over a reduction of more than 20 hours per week, the grant available through the Commonwealth is $600 per week. If it is less than 20 hours per week, it is $350 per week. So break it up into two categories. There are business grants and programs available through the state government. There are individual applications which can be made for individuals who suffered a reduction in their wages or their working hours, which are available through the Commonwealth. And it's important to bear that distinction in mind. And I anticipate that most of the questions in this forum this afternoon will be from businesses who want to explore what may or may not be available, or identify the circumstances of their own individual businesses where they may need some clarity or assistance, or just to provide government with advice about how their businesses are being impacted. And I noticed that on the line with me today, I've got one from my office, Benny Kang's on the office, and it is online, and he'll be taking a note of any specific issues that people want to raise and want to get addressed, and through Tamara and Nicole and through Felicity, we'll get back to you hopefully with answers to questions which we can't answer immediately, or Chris Lamont can't answer immediately. So back to you. Maybe Chris Lamont would like to add a couple of words, and then we'd like to hear from you. So thanks for having me here today.
Thanks very much, Minister.
So tomorrow I'm happy to launch in. Just a point of clarification following the Minister's summary there. Non-employing businesses, you may have mentioned it, Minister, I may have missed it, but non-employing businesses are also eligible for the JobSaver program, and that's a payment of $1,000 per week, and the total revenue for businesses under JobSaver is 50 million. The service that the Commission's providing at the moment is very much geared around the mediation support services, which the Chamber may have heard of and may have participated in some extent with members last year in terms of the National Code of Commercial Leasing. So disputes between tenants and landlords. And I've said this a few times, but despite what you might read in the media, not all landlords are terrible, and not all tenants are terrible. Most of them do agree to come to an arrangement which allows for either a reduction in rent or a suspension of rent or a deferment of rent. So they don't even come anywhere near my office, or they don't find themselves in dispute. They do that logically and pragmatically. Where there is a dispute, though, the Commission provides a mediation service that is neutral to try and resolve matters of dispute between the parties. And I'm pleased to say that more than 90% of matters that the Commission gets involved with are resolved at or before mediation, so avoiding complicated and potentially expensive legal battles. The government announced 3 weeks ago a decision to put a moratorium on lockouts or evictions in the retail and commercial tenant space. So what that means is that the parties have to participate in mediation before a lockout will be granted at this point in time. Now, we've seen an uptick in mediations and requests for mediation, but to date, they are primarily associated with business-to-business disputes. So where one business owes another money, or there's a contractual dispute, and perhaps COVID has added some intensity to the nature of those disputes. We are starting to get more queries in respect to mediation around lockouts and evictions, but it is relatively early days yet, but the Commission is staffed and ready to go in terms of hearing those disputes. The other thing I might just build on a point from the Minister, there's a cocktail of supports that were already available prior to the COVID package. And one of the ones that I'd really implore the Chamber to make a bit more noise about is the $1,500 rebate for businesses. So that can cover a vehicle registration, that can cover rates, that can cover the cost of mediation, that can cover driver's licenses. That is a straight $1,500 in the hands, well, not in the hands, but to rebate you the cost of those costs and services that businesses will go through. The other issue in terms of information, so Service New South Wales, very comprehensive website. My website also has a summary of the COVID supports on the front page, and you can just click down and see the various supports and mechanisms that are available for businesses. In terms of the grants themselves, and I've heard the Minister say this previously, the government hasn't been prescriptive in the sense of defining everyone who can or can't get, other than the broad financial criteria for JobSaver and the COVID-19 business grants. The reason for that is that Service New South Wales have a manual assessment process. So various businesses have spoken to us around the baseline comparison in terms of revenue, whether it's 2019, whether it's 2020. That is used to do an arbitrary assessment within Service New South Wales on eligibility. But many businesses may have started a business or may have bought a business within the last 12 months. So there is the capacity of Service New South Wales to manually assess those businesses and use the preceding quarter or another period to calculate eligibility. So I really want to stress that to the Chamber and those on this call, that there's a manual assessment process that Service New South Wales will use to determine eligibility in some of those other situations that business might find themselves in. Thanks, Tamara.
Thanks very much, Minister and the Commissioner, for those explanations. That obviously is an extremely complex, system that we've put together in terms of all the relief packages and everything. But I think going around talking to a lot of our businesses, the struggle is definitely real. And although everybody says we're all in the same boat together, there's definitely, from, you know, looking at big business, which are, you know, pretty much on the QE2, and then small business, which is floating around on a dinghy, is how they're kind of feeling in terms of, you know, the impact on them in terms of the lockdowns. Anyway, so now I'll move on to some questions. We've sent, as I said, a lot of questions in advance. So, and then we can have a look. There's quite a few that are coming through in the chat as well. So we'll try to get through as many as we can. So I've tried to sort of group them together. I guess we'll start off with what will be the longer term supports for the hospitality industry after the one-off grants, as businesses will not be back to any type of normal levels before Christmas. And also, can we, what are we doing to address the shortage of workers in the hospitality industry? Not sure who's kind of best placed to to respond.
Yeah, well, again, that's an industry specific, and there, as part of the relief program, there was an accommodation package which was made available, and I think there was a $75 million accommodation package for some people in the accommodation industry. Clearly, we also identified the Dine and Discover opportunity as something to assist businesses, but it was really more designed for businesses coming out of the pandemic, where we wanted to stimulate activity for the hospitality industry and the events industry. So what the government has identified is that there is certainly a large impact on the accommodation and events industry. And I must say that as we sit here today, the programs to assist businesses as they rebound from COVID, when the lockdowns actually finish, are probably yet to be worked out. In some of our discussions with COSBOA, for example, they have indicated to us that the packages available once the lockdown finishes shouldn't just stop. They should continue for a period of time while businesses recover. There will be some businesses which will recover more quickly, but others that will take some time to, in fact, start to generate levels of liquidity which allow them to get back on their feet. And we ought to have a staggered approach to some of the programs that we've had in foot. So there will be a number of initiatives undertaken to include opportunities to support the accommodation industry through a tailored accommodation package. There will be work done in relation to the events industry to assist those businesses to get back on their feet. One thing that that questioner just did also identify is the problem even coming out of the last lockdown or the last rebound from the COVID provisions was the need for training of people and to obtain staff. Lots of restaurants and caterers, people identified that they couldn't get staff to assist them and were calling on family and friends and everyone to assist them in their businesses. And that by and large was driven a bit by the reduction in the overseas students, overseas travellers and overseas tourists or working tourists coming to Australia. So it has that effect of we don't have lots of staff to be able to work in that industry. Some of the things that we are doing in relation to that is trying to work with TAFE with a view to training programs. And I anticipate that we will ramp that up again as we emerge from the lockdown period. One thing that has got lost in this, and I hope Chris doesn't mind me talking about this, but we just before this lockdown occurred, one of the things which we were doing was trying to deliver a program to assist small businesses to be able to contract with government. And we have developed a number of modules which was designed to take people through how do you put together a tender or have a real opportunity of tendering for government work, which would position you to be able to get that work in a pretty competitive marketplace. Because we have a policy as a government, a process where we want more small businesses to get cut of the government pie. Now, clearly that seems a long way out of people's focus, but it should be something that business remains or has in their back pocket, so to speak, that maybe I should use this time to find out what's available potentially for government contracts and make sure that I'm a business which may be capable of tendering for government work. Do you want to add anything, Chris?
No, I think you've summed it up well, Minister. That program we hope will be out within a month. The only thing I would add is that most people who are successful in tendering to government also are fairly successful in tendering to the private sector. So the old adage, if you can win a government tender, you can win a private sector tender. So the course itself will be free. It will be online through TAFE. And there'll be a guide that accompanies the material to assist small business.
Great, thanks very much for that, Minister and Commissioner. There's just another comment I've had from another one of our larger hospitality businesses, the Mosman Club and the Fernery, talking about they're between, I think the gap or the bracket is 75K to 50 million in turnover. And if I'm understanding it right, there's a maximum of 15K a week in terms of support, where they're used to 120K a week, and they've obviously got their ongoing rent and other costs that they've got to keep paying. And that seems to be quite a large bracket to be covering with such a small weekly amount. Do you have any comments on that for I guess, our larger small business?
Yeah, well, what I would say in relation to that, in fact, I thought the amount, that's the JobSaver amount, it was $10,000, a maximum of $10,000 per week. And in fact, I was wrong before. I think I said it was between $75,000 and $10 million. We, in fact, increased that to $50 million. Now, clearly, an organisation like the Mosman Club, it would, in many respects, that would create a significant gap. $10,000 per week would not potentially go anywhere near covering the expenses which they have. But there are other things which were available: the deferral of payroll tax, the deferral of gaming tax, which was also made available to clubs and pubs who are significantly impacted. So the extent of this package is about $4 billion. So to actually get to that point, this is not a package which is designed to cover every loss which every business has had, because we just couldn't do it. It would not be feasible for government to do this. But what this is a package to try and do is to put businesses within that range with some liquidity for the purposes of meeting some or most of the obligations which they have for continuing to run their businesses and to be able to be there when the lockdown finishes. Now, if you say to me, we're a business which is potentially suffering a loss of $70,000 or $100,000 a week, $10,000 is not going to cut it in terms of being able to compensate you for the loss which you are suffering. This isn't a business, a package which is designed to compensate businesses for every dollar that they have lost. It is a package designed to try and assist businesses, put money in their accounts to be able to meet some of the expenses which they have to meet with a view to getting through to the other side.
And when you say deferral, how long is it deferred for? Because I guess then at least they still have to then pay, they're still going to have to pay it.
Yeah, well, the information I had, the deferral for the April, June, July, September quarters. So clearly, yes, they will have to eventually pay it, but it is not something they have to come up with immediately, which has an impact on the cash flow which they have at this time. But deferral is exactly that. It's a deferral in the same way as people have rent deferrals or mortgage deferrals. It's designed to assist businesses with not having an immediate call on their cash flow.
Mm. Okay, thank you. I'll move on because we're already halfway through. Small business is the backbone of the local communities. I guess we've touched on this a bit anyway. Financial assistance offered is not enough for an extended lockdown. How are we going to survive? And particularly, we've had a bit of feedback from the travel industry, which have been extremely hard hit.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess that's a general question, but.
Well, can I just say in relation to that, and on a call with the federal ministers this afternoon, or later this afternoon, another forum like this, people may have seen that there was a push to get a reinstatement of JobKeeper, and that potentially would have provided a greater level of assistance for businesses, because it would have kept, or it will keep, employees connected to their business, and it takes away from the business the obligation which it had to find the money to pay their staff and the like. Now, at the moment, they can certainly get the Commonwealth COVID grant money from Services Australia. However, in our discussions with the Commonwealth, as I understand it, one of the problems of reintroducing JobKeeper is that a lot of the accounting software would have to be got up and running and wouldn't be available for at least a month. That the complexity of getting that program up for a state-based program it would be too complex to do. So I think the alternative would be, we're currently working on 40% of payroll. If the Commonwealth was prepared to top up the contribution from the Commonwealth, whereby we could go to 60% of payroll, that may in fact give a greater level of support to businesses because of the length of the shutdown. So what we are pressing the Commonwealth to do is to provide additional support funding so we can give an additional amount and take the 40% of payroll tax in the JobSaver program at the moment and increase the amount of the payment.
Well, that sounds good. Yeah, we have had a lot of suggestions about reinstating JobKeeper. So yeah, if you could do anything on that, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I think that the way out of that, right, is to have an additional payment on top of where we currently are with JobSaver, which is almost entirely funded by the state government.
And is there an end date for JobSaver at the moment?
Yeah, I think it has been brought into effect from weeks 3 to 7. So what we had anticipated is that hopefully the lockdown would be over in 7 weeks. So this is an ongoing issue that we're dealing with, but we have worked on this. The JobSaver is a program for weeks 4 to 7. What happens after week 7, if this goes beyond that, is something that the government will assess going forward.
Okay. What relief or grants are available for new small businesses? What support is available for small businesses that are over the 75k threshold, have no employees and have only been operating for under 12 months in a business premises?
And it's a common question that is asked. And what I started this discussion with by saying people ought to get advice in respect of that circumstance. Service New South Wales have been told that they've got to be flexible in relation to the evidence which they require for the downturn in that business. Now, that's where that business would need to provide potentially a statement or some sort of evidence from an accountant or the like to say, sure, we haven't been in operation, or we weren't in operation in 2019. We started up in 2020 or 21, and this lockdown has given us this, and the accountant would potentially do projections or the like relating to that business and be able to demonstrate the downturn in that business. So the key message there is that service will be flexible. However, it will be a manual assessment and will not be one which is done just by declaration, where the business is asked to provide a declaration as to their downturn and the extent of that downturn. Now, we wanted to get the money out the door quickly, so we wanted the process quickly, and clearly it is designed at the moment for businesses which were in existence in 2019. However, going forward, for those businesses in the category which your questioner identified, it is based on being flexible around it and providing as much information as possible to demonstrate the downturn that the applicant for the grant is seeking, supported by some evidence if that's at all possible. But we want money placed in those businesses so they can survive. And I think at the moment, as of today, I think we had nearly $100 million out the door already in respect of the grants which had been already processed. So, but the message in respect of those businesses, there may be some patience involved because they will require a manual assessment by a Service New South Wales assessor.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, from the one sent in prior, rent. I know we said that obviously not all tenants are bad and landlords are bad, but definitely for some of our tenants, the landlords have not been forthcoming in passing any of their assistance on. And in previous lockdowns, there were more clear guidelines around, exactly how it was going to work. And there's a lot of our businesses that are under a lot of commercial rent pressure. Is the government looking at doing anything like was in place last time with more clear guidelines around that, rather than being subjective or going to a mediation and that sort of thing?
Yeah, and it is something which is really a fraught problem. We had the National Code, as you correctly identified, on the last occasion, which in fact required landlords to provide rent reductions and deferrals of rent in circumstances where businesses had suffered a downturn of 50% or more. And again, it was accompanied by a prohibition against eviction or lockout. One of the things that where we currently are is, and Chris will speak to this, is that most landlords, in fact, were disposed to mediating an outcome rather than losing a tenant. And I think the success of the Small Business Commissioner was really quite amazing in terms of negotiating those positions. What we have to do, of course, is remember that lots of landlords are also small businesses. And for those landlords, they potentially are also highly impacted because their tenants can no longer pay rent or whatever, and they are currently within that. So we have resisted going back to the National Code at the moment. However, it's an ongoing discussion, and if the evidence arises that, in fact, landlords are pursuing outrageous demands on their tenants, then I'd be interested to get that feedback, and potentially it's something we'd have to have a look at again. But we've not gone down that road, and if some or someone on this call or an acquaintance of someone or a business which you know of is having difficulty getting an outcome with their landlord, we'd want to know about it and potentially understand what's happening. And if Chris could be involved in relation to that process, I think you may find that that would produce a pretty worthwhile outcome. Chris, have you got something to add in relation to that?
Minister, the only additional thing I was going to make was that mediation can join third parties as well. So a mediation can occur at the moment regardless of a threat or a proposed eviction or lockout. But a landlord might seek to join in mediation their bank or financier. So that can be an effective strategy of actually getting relief for the landlord, who in some cases is also faced with rent and a mortgage, to the mediating table, so we can actually sort out a solution. So mediation doesn't necessarily just involve the two parties who are in dispute, who are looking for a resolution, but can join third parties. So we are hearing a request, and we will conduct mediations that include the banking sector as well.
Why wouldn't you just have done the code of conduct so there's no room for anyone to be left out?
We had a good look at it, but for the reason that I just articulated, is we formed the view that lots of landlords were in fact also small businesses, and we didn't want to necessarily just go down that route immediately. That's why I think we opted for reasonably generous business support grants. Now, for some, that they're not as generous as they would like them to be, but we thought that they were a significantly generous grant to try and get businesses through. The longer this goes forward, of course, though, we would expect that banks and landlords will have to come to the party more to make sure that businesses do survive. It was a judgment call that we didn't. If we took the view that if the support grants were reasonably robust, then the requirement to move away from to impose the additional code again wasn't as obligatory. But as it goes forward, it's something that can potentially be in the mix to further assist businesses.
Yeah, I think from the feedback we got prior, it came through strongly in the questions that we got in advance and also in the chat now. It seems like there's a lot of people having trouble with
their landlord. Yeah. Well, then, that's the sort of feedback I think we would. And if I haven't got the capacity to screenshot the chat session that's going on in the background, but if we can get a screenshot of the issues which are being raised by people who are on that, who are contributing on the chat, that'd be worthwhile.
Okay. Minister, if I may say, I would actually say from feedback from across all of Warringah has been a growing call for that mandatory code, for the code to be made mandatory, because there is a growing sense that the calls for assistance and negotiation aren't being heard.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that. It's nice to see you, Zali.
Thanks, Zali. I've just got a couple of specific questions from one of our tourism businesses in regards to small business hardship grants. Apparently the dates were changed. Originally, the dates you had to prove it were the end of June to July 17, and then it changed to mid-July only. Do you guys have any comments on that, or you know what?
I can answer that, Minister, if you want. Yeah. But so the intention behind that was to unite the COVID-19 business grant with the JobSaver grant. Mm-hmm. So as the Minister mentioned, the COVID-19 business grant was a support payment for weeks 1 to 3, mm-hmm. and then JobSaver starting from weeks 4 to 7. So there was going to be an overlap with the periods for which those both of those grants commenced. I will make reference to the point the Minister made, though, earlier. Service New South Wales will look at applications that go beyond the fortnight period or the 3-week period that was disclosed in the eligibility requirements, but that will be a manual assessment. And at this stage, the default assessment is that, I think, 3-week period.
Right, okay. All right, thanks very much. I might hand over to Nicole, just to see out of, we've had so many questions in the chat. I've been trying to keep an eye on them a little bit, but Nicole, if there's anything that you think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been having a look through. I mean, there's quite a number around some things that are being partly addressed, I suppose. Definitely a lot about rent relief. So that's definitely come through, and the call for the code. So that's a very common theme. And there's also been specifically requests in terms of any potential support from councils for any rent relief on council land, etc. I'm not sure if that can be addressed specifically.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because under the previous provisions, I think certainly lessees of Crown properties, and I thought local government properties were given a rent holiday. So let me just take that up, Nicole, and see if there's an opportunity or just get some instructions about whether we already have something in place in relation to tenants of council property.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, was someone going to speak then? No. Okay. There was also a lot of questions about really the eligibility criteria and how the manual assessment works. And I know there is a post in the chat about it being a manual process, and you need to call Service New South Wales, and they will. So if you can say more about how that manual process works.
Well, it may be, for example, instead of your figures for the corresponding period in June, July 2019, the service may accept business activity statements which have been prepared for that business for the last 2, 3, 4 quarters to demonstrate the level of turnover contained in those business activity statements. So there would be potentially a range of things that service could ask for the business to demonstrate the impact, because what we're trying to get is a circumstance where the business just demonstrates the impact of the lockdown on their business, and the level of grant to which people are entitled to is depending upon the extent of that impact. So the two things that have got to be identified by the advisors are, was there an impact, and what level of grant you're entitled to as a result of that impact. So it appears to me that business activity statements would be an obvious way that potentially a business can demonstrate that downturn.
Minister, can I just add to that? There's a business concierge service through Service New South Wales. So people can phone 13 77 88 and rather than stay on the line for hours, they will call you back and they can discuss your personal circumstance with you. Our Business Connect advisors across the state can also assist, and that's a free service that is in the Minister's portfolio. So they provide dedicated support and assistance, so they can also assist small businesses through this grants process. My website has the fundamentals, but the concierge service for Service New South Wales is returning calls. I think they returned something like 22,000 calls over the last 2 days. So they will get back to you and discuss your specific circumstance.
Great, thanks for that. There was a couple of questions also about essentially, I suppose, sole traders who are not on the payroll themselves for the business and then are not entitled for JobSaver. So I guess just questions around how they can get some additional support.
Well, I'm surprised that you say that they're not entitled to JobSaver, because they may well be if they are a highly impacted business with an ABN and have an annual turnover above $75,000. That's the criteria. But that business, if it's in the period has an income in that gap of between $30,000 and $75,000, you may want to make an assessment about whether they applied for the Commonwealth grant payment, was the $600 potentially a week for the 20 plus hours of downturn, or or less than 20 hours. But a business that is a self-employing business should and may well be entitled to a JobSaver grant. Is that correct, Chris?
That's right, Minister. I think the issue might be businesses that are hovering just around the 30K mark, and whether they can apply for both. The short answer is no. It's the primary source of income. So if you're less than 30,000, it's fairly arbitrary. The COVID support payment from the Commonwealth is the assistance to seek. If people are wanting to switch from the COVID support payment to the micro business grant, they need to cease their payment through Service Australia. So you can't get the COVID micro business grant from the New South Wales state government whilst receiving the COVID support payment. So that's an important issue to raise.
Yeah, I think, Chris, the question was potentially for the business earning more than $75,000, had an annual turnover of more than 75,000. But which was a self-employing business.
Oh, yes. Sorry, Minister. So that's $1,000 per week they're potentially eligible for if they can demonstrate the reduction in revenue.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And there was one that actually came at the very beginning, really about whether, and I don't know if anyone can fill us in at the moment, but if the government's looking to sectioning off lockdowns like they did with, the Northern Beaches last year. So I don't know if there's any discussion we can have about sectioning off sections of Sydney, I suppose, at the moment.
I understand the sentiment behind that, and in fact, I have some sympathy for that view. That if you're a non-COVID impacted area, can we start lifting the lockdowns there? Now, I'm not in crisis cabinet, unfortunately, or fortunately for me, whatever way you look at it. Those decisions are made by people in that environment, and they are privy to a whole lot of information which I'm not privy to, including which it's a phrase which everyone must be getting tired of, the health advice, but it is what it is. And but I understand that sentiment that there would be some, I suppose, push for, well, there are no cases in Neutral Bay or Mosman or wherever. Why can't we, in fact, be an area which can open up and go about our normal trade? Now, I have some sympathy for that.
Thank you.
If I could add, sorry, to that, unfortunately, our area doesn't have a greater vaccination rate than anywhere else. So we unfortunately are just as exposed to the virus and and not everyone that lives in the area works in the area, and conversely, not everyone that works in the area lives in the area. And so whilst it's really attractive, the proposition of cordoning off areas, you can't ensure that you won't have a visit or someone coming into the area from another LGA that has a higher level of infection. So unfortunately, all the evidence is that this spreads incredibly fast, and that easing of restriction in tight localities like what we had Northern Beaches at Christmas time, for example, wouldn't be as possible or effective in this situation. The number one issue is getting everyone as vaccinated as possible. If I could take the opportunity to encourage everyone to get vaccinated, because it is ultimately that needs to happen.
Zali, they're really important points which I should have made, and in fact, that's the sort of discussion which I'm sure is had by the decision makers. The issue which you do raise about level of vaccination rates may be high on the list of things which would be taken into account by the crisis committee in making whatever determinations that would make. So 100% right in those observations.
Right, yeah, thanks very much, Minister, and thanks very much, Zali. And thanks very much to Nicole as well. We're just coming up to the end of the meeting. I just thought I'd leave some comments that people have just put forward in the chat. JobKeeper and the code were both relatively simple. And at the moment, it seems like it's accessing all of these grants is quite complex, taking into account what you said about how difficult it is and the time it would take to get all that JobKeeper and everything up and running again. But that seemed like a more a simple way to go about it. Some people are finding it very difficult. Someone's been waiting to get a call back from the concierge. They've been waiting for over a week, so it's quite difficult to get that feedback and financial help quickly. Yeah, so they're just the latest questions, or latest comments that have come through on the chat. I just thought I'd put them forward. Has anybody else got anything else? I think.
Could I just add to one of the earlier questions
Tamara,
around?
sorry, I was going to say Tamara.
Sorry.
Oh. I was going to say Tamara, because I think we're wrapping up now. I know we requested the hour from the Minister and the Commissioner. I just wanted to say I've been following the chat quite closely, and there's some incredibly good feedback there. And obviously, these businesses are very different and diverse as well. And I just wanted to make sure that, not only do we have the small business concierge, but one of the reasons that we've organised this through Tamara is to make sure that me and my name and my face, and Chris McDermott, who's on the call as well. If you do have any issues, if you want to speak to me or my team, we're very happy to help try and facilitate connections for you, get extra information and advice. So we're not in the office, we're working from home like the rest of you, but you can call us or email. And our email is just northshore@parliament.sw.gov.au. You can go through Tamara as well if you'd like, but very, very happy to take any additional calls or emails if there's further feedback. We, as the Minister said, we're definitely taking on the feedback and making adjustments as we go. And I know you would have seen the Treasurer has been putting some pressure on trying to get JobKeeper reinstated as well, the New South Wales Treasurer. So we'll continue to take on the feedback and do what we can to support you. But the only way we know the nuances of how you're affected is if you share that information with us. So please do reach out to me or Tamara, and we'll do what we can to support you.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, Felicity. And Zali's just got a hand up the moment.
Sorry about that. I very much echo all that. I just want to say the earlier question about skills shortages. It is an ongoing discussion with Minister Andrews about where the categories for exemptions for travel are. Obviously, the discussion around arrival caps and quarantine took a hit with the current lockdown, but there was an ongoing discussion around identifying skill shortages and where the categories for exemption were. That conversation's continuing, so it is important to get feedback from businesses. What are the areas of skill and industry where there is a real shortage? Unemployment is fairly low in the area, in Warringah, but there's definitely feedback from businesses around specific areas, especially in hospitality, where there is skill shortages.
Great. Okay. All right. Thank you. We're just running over time. So I'm just going to say thank you very, very much to all our businesses who've come aboard. Thank you very, very much to all of our speakers. Minister Tudehope, hugely appreciate your time. And Commissioner Lamont. Also Felicity Wilson, Zali Steggall, Mayor Gibson, Mayor Corrigan. Really, really appreciate the time that you've taken to talk to our businesses today. This recording is going to be available on the Mosman Chamber website in the next couple of days. And of course, the Mosman Chamber is always looking for new members. So if you would like to get in contact with us, that would be fabulous, and join up. And thank you once again, everybody.
Thanks, Tamara. Thanks, everybody.
Stay safe, everybody.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Tamara.